mesdames et messieurs, ça fait grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Hello everybody, I'm absolutely delighted to be in Brussels to see you all today. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions. Shopping in the household. We heard a lot about that from Marion. And a couple of quick questions. Men, how many, I don't think we've got that many in our audience today, but of the men in the audience, how many of you would say that where food shopping is concerned, you are doing 50% or more of that shopping? Let's see some hands. One hand. Okay. And women in the audience, who, as Marion said, are the majority today, hands up if you think you're doing 50% or more of the food shopping. Okay, that looks like a lot of the women in the audience today. How many of you think it's a joint effort between men and women? Not so many hands going up. Okay, so it looks from that as though women are doing the majority of the food shopping. Medicines. Let's ask exactly the same questions again, this time of medicines. Of the men in the audience, how many of you go out and buy more than 50% of the medicines? Okay, thank you. Women, more than 50% of the medicine shopping? Thank you, lots of hands. Joint effort? Okay, so again, some joint effort, but it looks as though it's predominantly a female effort there. Great, thank you. Now, have you got a piece of paper? It only has to be a small piece of paper. And I'm not actually looking for any Picassos. Marion mentioned Picasso. A scribble will do very nicely. And what I would like you to do is draw a person. It could be a stick person. And you never know the value of these things. Sign it with a name. It doesn't have to be your name, but give that person a name. So a quick stick person and give that person a name. Fantastic. So you should be finishing that off now. We're not looking for works of art. That's absolutely fabulous. Does the job very nicely. Oh, beautiful. Yes, lots of nice stick people. So let's just have, I will come back to this later, women in the audience. Looking at the names, how many of you drew a figure that represents a female? Hands nicely high up, so you can have a look. You can all look at each other's. Yeah, thank you. How many of the women in the audience drew a figure with a man's name? Okay, so that's a smaller proportion. Can you see that? Of the men in the audience, and I can see two, but there may be more. So we have a smaller sample here. Could you indicate whether you drew a man? Hands up. Both men drew a man. Thank you. Okay. So what we can see from that, I hope you saw that from that quick and dirty experiment, is that we have a tendency to draw people of our own gender. No worries if you don't do that. There are plenty of quite reasonable reasons for that. We'll come to that later. Anyway, why am I standing here today? How did I come to be here talking about straight lines and polka dots? Well, this is a question I often ask myself, because I used to be working full-time in industry as a training and development manager, trying to change the culture and things like that. Well, I have to blame, if you like, the building at the top of this slide. It's the Mall Galleries down the road from Buckingham Palace in London, and I wandered in there in the 1990s to look at an exhibition of watercolours. And you can see the sort of paintings I was looking at there. And the paintings on display were for sale, but in order to find out what they cost, you had to buy the catalogue, and the catalogue was rather expensive. So I thought I'd be very clever, and I just jot down the numbers of the paintings that appealed to me, which is what I did. I jotted down the numbers that appealed to me, and then I sneaked a look at the catalogue on the desk, just to see the prices. And what I discovered was that 80% of the paintings on my shortlist were by women. Well, I'm not a watercolourist. I thought maybe watercolours are done by women. So I had another look at the catalogue, and flicking through it, it didn't look as though most of the names were female. In the end, I bought that catalogue and did a calculation, and statistically speaking, most of the paintings in the exhibition were actually by men, not by women. And so the odds against my selecting largely an all-female list were very small. What had happened was strange, I thought. And I thought, well, if this is something about the world and not just about me, then it could have vast implications. And what does one do if one doesn't know if something exists? You do a literature search. So off I went, and I did a literature search, and I searched, and I searched, and I searched. I couldn't find anything. This was the era of men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So there was plenty about emotions. He sits by the fire, likes to talk to his fire, but there was nothing about the visual. And I still wanted to know if this was something peculiar about me, or if it was something about the world. So off I went, and I thought, well, something has to be looked into here. As I say, little research, either on design creations and preferences, or on advertising. And when I dug deep, I found out some of the reasons why there was so little research. Back in the 1990s, a male professor said that the field of consumer research has been dominated by the masculine orientation, and a female professor concurred and said that the feminine perspective has been excluded from all but a small proportion of current consumer research. So there was my reason. There was no research because most research assumed the male perspective and assumed that the female perspective would be similar. Well, it still didn't answer my questions, did it? So for the intervening of nearly 20 years, I've been busy trying to fill the gaps. And now we have some of the gaps filled with these books that I've written, and the most recent one is a lighter read than many of the others, Why Men Like Straight Lines and Women Like Polka Dots, because I want to bring this new understanding out there, because I think we need to understand these differences. So in the short space of time I have today, this is our little program for our journey today. It took me 20 years, but today we'll do it in about 30 minutes. And I'll begin by looking at the politics of gender, which is like the context in which we do these studies. Then talk about why this matters. Why should one spend 20 years of one's life looking at this issue? We'll look at the implications, both for what men and women create visually and what they prefer visually. Look at the implications for organisations and for the individual. Look at the why of anything we found out. And then we'll move forward and see what this means for ourselves individually and for our organisations. So let's kick off with the issue of the politics of gender. And I think it's very important to flag this up, because essentially, it took me a while to understand the waters in which I was swimming, but essentially there are two polarised views, and they are completely polarised. So the first view, which you've got up there, is expressed in these quotes, that gender is an unproductive dichotomy rooted in cultural understandings of what it means to be masculine or feminine. So that quote is saying there's really no difference between men and women, it's all down to culture. And if we could change culture, then they'd be exactly the same. Well, the second quote, and I could give you lots and lots of these quotes, because this is actually the dominant paradigm, I would say, at the moment. The second quote says that as inequalities are removed, gender differences will diminish or disappear, resulting in widespread androgyny, i.e. no differences between men and women. And with that spirit in mind, in the UK, for example, one of the world's biggest toy retailers, Hamleys, has now removed the girls and boys toys sections and merged them. And another big retailer, Marks and Spencer, has done exactly the same. They've merged the boys and the girls section. On the basis, I think, of this belief in widespread androgyny. Now, that's contrasted with, as a polarised opposite view, sex differences exist. That is expressed by Professor Baron Cohen, Professor of Psychology at the University of Cambridge, who's written a book on sex differences. It's also replicated in very thick tome by Professor Geary, Professor of Psychology in America. His book on sex differences is published by the American Psychological Association, and he talks about sex differences existing and being the byproduct of evolutionary processes operating for about 2 million years. So we're talking nurture here, but we're talking nurture acting out on a very long-term timescale. So there's a point at which biology and nurture, nature and nurture, if you like, come together through evolutionary processes. So we have these polarised views. The jury's out at this point in the presentation as to where this will take us with gender and design. Why should we matter? Well, as Hélène told us at the beginning, we have a market, and Marion reiterated this, worth trillions of dollars that women are buying into. And companies need to maximise their profitability, and individuals want to be satisfied with the products that they get. Well, I've just put a photo here of some products that were available on Valentine's Day, 14th of February last year, through Marks and Spencer's. And this was from their website. The wording was, "Lavish your loved one so that she is lost in romance." I don't know what you think of these grey coasters. They didn't send me into the stratosphere of romance. I thought, my goodness, what does Marks and Spencer think it's doing? And perhaps it's no coincidence that their sales are dropping year on year. Anyway, I don't have anything personal against Marks and Spencer, so we will move swiftly on. Why does this matter? I'm going to show you some demographics for the percentage of male and female shoppers, purchasers by different sectors. Across the board, all purchases, 83% of all purchases are made by women. And we're working down, you can see those up. Beauty, 96%, food, which we looked at earlier, 93%, medicines over the counter, 93%. Women are buying the majority of these products. Holidays as well. Even cars, 60% plus of new cars are bought by women, and so on. And so it matters to know whether what women prefer is different from what men prefer. It matters to know whether what women and men produce creatively, visually, is the same or different, like my watercolour exhibition experience. At the moment, we can say that, by and large, as Marion told us, women are not satisfied with a lot of what they're served up. I'm just going to show you some results of some surveys. Here was a Consumer Electronics Association survey showing that 99% of women were not satisfied with what they got. Here's another survey by advertisers about women's reaction to advertisers, saying that a majority felt misunderstood. Here's another one, it just goes on, investment. And cars, what do women think about cars and healthcare and food? There are high levels, as you can see here, of dissatisfaction on the part of women. So this is why it's worth spending half an hour, if not 20 years, looking at this topic. Let's now look at some more demographics. Let's look at who's actually producing the designs and advertising that women are responding to in a not very positive sense. So that's the next slide here. I should say it's very difficult to get this data. The data you're looking at is membership data. This is design, by the way. Membership data from a professional design association based in the UK, but with members overseas as well. And being a membership, a professional body, there are different grades of membership. And I've indicated fellows, which would be the most senior level of membership, as indicating probably the profile of the senior people in the industry. So if you look at design management overall, you can see males and females. You can see that 84% are male fellows, so we can assume that that profession is male-dominated. Product design, very much so, as you can see, male-dominated. And graphic design starts off equally balanced, well, with a slight female advantage. And then, as you can see, as we move up the seniority stakes, it becomes more male-dominated. So we have a picture here of a profession, design profession, which is largely male-dominated. What about advertising? Let me show you some figures for advertising. I've got UK and US figures here, and you can see a very similar picture emerging. Web design, of course, vital in today's retail environment. There were no figures, so I did a survey of my own, and those are the results that came out from the survey. So, summing up where we've got so far in our journey, we can see that most people doing the buying are women. Most people serving up the products, the designs to those women are not women, they are men. And design matters. Design matters massively. Research shows us that design shapes a person's overall reactions to a product. So it's not just adding a little bit of gloss, it actually has a massive impact on how we react to products. And I'm just going to quickly take you through some of the literature. If you ever want to justify a focus on design, there are 4 points really that you want to highlight. And the first is this, that how you react, how you perceive, how you rate the design element of a product influences your perception of that product's usefulness, how much you enjoy it, the satisfaction you derive. All of that based on what you think of the look of the product. And not just that, it will influence what you think of the product's usability. As if that's not exciting enough, it will also influence how long you look at something, and you know that a lot of marketing effort is aimed at increasing the amount of time people attend to things. And as if that's not enough, last but not least, people will pay, and a German researcher found this out, a price premium of 55% minimum for something they like the look at, something they like the look of. And I've given many masterclasses and workshops, and usually there's somebody in the audience who says, well, it's funny you should say that, because last week I bought myself a toaster or kettle or some other electrical product, and it was much more expensive than I intended to pay for. But I had to buy it because I really, really like the look of it. So it's very important that we serve our predominantly female market with products that they like the look of. So, research questions back in the 1990s that were emerging then. Do male and female design creations look the same? Or do they look different? That's very important, given what we've seen about the demographic of the industry. And what about their preferences? Would they respond like I did that day at the exhibition? And if they did respond like I did that day, could we say there was some kind of a mismatch between the purchasing demographics and the design and advertising demographics? And if so, what would then be the implications for organisations? We're going to try and do all of that in the remaining time that we have today. I'd like you to look at some pictures now. Most of the rest of the presentation isn't words, it's pictures. And I'm going to take you through the journey of the research I did to try and answer these questions. And I'm going to begin with 2 slides showing images of designs that were produced by students in a design school, because if you're doing this kind of research, you need to have controlled samples. So you're going to see images that students produced for a brief to design a luxury chocolate box. So there are 8 of these. There's the first 4. And if I tell you that half of these were designed by women and half designed by men, I don't know if any of you would like to hazard a guess. Any brave people in the audience? And you don't actually have to be that brave, because it may be pretty obvious. Left is male, very good. And the right is female. Yeah, both the ones on the right are female, and both the ones on the left are turned out to be created by the same brief. And what can you see about the ones on the right? What characteristics do they have? The ones on the right. On the right?
Feminine.
Rounded shapes. And the ones on the left, as you said, straight lines. Which one has more detail? The female or the male? Female. Okay, so we're learning. And these were the next 4. You can guess the genders of those. Top right. Top right? Male. Bottom right? Correct. Top left? Brilliant. Bottom left? 100%. And mapping that onto a graph, won't go through the process. If you imagine that the top line represents the shape of the elements in the male designs, and the bottom line, the pink one, and a jump, the shape and features in the female produced designs, you've got at the bottom the elements that distinguish these designs. And what you can see, if you look here, is that where you've got the greatest dichotomy is the area of greatest difference. So here, at that point in the slide, here, you're looking at linearity, which is the shape of the lines. Can you all see that? You've got the big disparity. Here, another disparity to do with colourfulness. And here, another disparity is the degree of technical precision. So this all emerged from this single experiment. I've done quite a few of the experiments. I've only got time today to introduce you to one more. This was a study looking at how boys and girls had coloured in these cookers. It was part of a competition run in a local newspaper. And there were more than 200 entries, 204, more or less equal numbers of entries by boys and girls. And I simply compared the way that the boys and the girls had coloured them in. And what I've put here on this slide at the top are 2 that are typical of one of the genders, and at the bottom 2 that are typical of the other gender. Which is the gender at the top, would you guess? Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So how did you guess that? And what are the differences between the 2? What can you see in the female ones at the bottom that you can't see in the male ones at the top? More colour. Anything else? What about the way the colour is used? Yes, they've broken up the shape, like the doors, done in several colours, and the knobs. And the male is more uniform, single use of colour. So I want to summarise from my own research, but also I found studies going back quite a long way of boys and girls drawings and adolescents drawings. Nobody brought this stuff together, but I'm going to show you what this reveals. In terms of the creations that men produce, if you look at formal features like colour and shape, then the studies reveal that men use more straight lines, darker colours, much more 3D in appearance, less detail, more serious looking, and they will tend to use images of males, like we saw with our drawing experiment at the beginning, and they will tend to use inanimate images, so cars, boats, that kind of thing. Whereas, and it's virtually opposite, the female will tend to use rounded lines, brighter colours, more colours, greater number of colours, more two-dimensional look, more detail, more light-hearted kind of feel to things, images of females rather than males, and animate images, so flowers, animals, people, that kind of thing. I should say that these differences do not apply to 100% of men and women. There will always be an area of overlap, but predominantly these are tendencies that have emerged from my research and from these other studies. So what I want to do, just in 4 slides now, and if I was doing a workshop, of course, I'd show you many, many more pictures. But I just want to introduce you to these concepts in creations across a range of products. And the first product I'm going to show you is a camera. We're back to the world of students. And I went into a very well-known art school where they were asking the students from all around the world to produce a design for a camera for children. And there were 6 students in this group, 3 male and 3 female, and I'm going to show you what they produced, and you can do your guessing game again. By the way, they use a sort of blue material to create the product. One was still at the drawing stage, the top right one. So if you look down columns, one column were the solutions by the men in the group, and the other column were the solutions from the women in the group. Any guesses? Very difficult, this one, I think. Right is by females, and left is by males, yeah. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Shortly after that, I was asked to join a group of marketing, European marketing leaders for Canon cameras, and they were discussing why the market share of their rectangular black Instamatic cameras sold largely to women was falling. And I was able to, like the rabbit that the conjurer produces out of the hat, I was able to show them this picture. And you could see the light bulbs going on in their eyes, because they're thinking, didn't know cameras could be round, and that they could have colour. And so then we got the Ixus camera, which did rather well and got them out of the doldrums. My next image comes from a swimming pool. Like Marion says, I force myself to do exercise. Mine is of the swimming variety. And I used to go to a public pool. And I'm going to show you signage that was in the pool when I first went, and then it was replaced by new signage. So on the left is the signage that originally greeted me in this swimming pool. I used to love going to this pool, very airy. But if you look at that signage, it's not very regular, is it? You've got sort of curvy lines, you've got a rather fanciful typescript, colourful. I found out that the pool was the work of a female architect, including the signage. Little by little, this signage was removed and replaced by the signage you can see on the right-hand side. Now, the planning department of the local authority is staunchly male, so I would imagine that they were behind this. And what do we see? Much more regular typeface. We see arrows, straight lines. We see a male diving into the pool.
Do you know why this has been removed?
Very good. I think they just liked it, because I could talk about this at length, and I do in this book. In the end, I couldn't bear to go to this swimming pool anymore. It upset me so much to see the changes. You know, it was. I don't think I've got time to talk about this today. I'd love to talk about it, but maybe if I've got time at the end, I'll come back to that. I'm now going to show you fish finger packets, and one of the designs was produced by a female designer, and the other by a male. Let's do our guessing game again. Top one, female. Bottom one, male. How do we know that? What are the elements that distinguish them?
The colors.
Colour. Top one's much more colour. Anything else?
Are they males?
And there's a male in the bottom one. He's put his own picture in there. Because you see, I mean, this is actually, we'll come to this in a minute, but actually when we draw, a lot of the time, I hope you don't mind me saying this, we draw ourselves. Look again at your pictures. But also the top one is not very dimensional. It's sort of hanging in space. Whereas the bottom one is very, very three-dimensional, isn't it? Anyway, my last image for today. If you've been in the UK in the 1980s, 1990s, all your bills, telephone bills, would have come with this logo. And the telephone monopoly, as it was, created a lot of money creating this logo. It was produced by a top agency called Wolf Olins. And there's a pan player. I'd like you to tell me whether you think that shows a male figure, a female figure, or an androgynous, sexless figure. So if you think it's a male figure, put your hands up. That looks like 3/4 of the room. If not, yeah, thank you. If you think it's a female figure, put your hands up. No. And if you think it's sexless, could you put your hands up? So that's about, thank you, less than 1/4. Thank you. Okay, I went to speak to the designer of this logo in this fancy agency, and I asked him about this brief. What had he been asked to create? He'd been asked to create, he told me, an androgynous figure that was neither male nor female, that would appeal to the population at large. I don't know if you know, I mean, it's not rocket science that women spend longer on the phones than men. So that's what he came up with. I did a quick survey, found the same results as in this room today. Most people think that looks like a male. I think it shows the tendency that we all have, quite naturally, to draw people that look like ourselves. Okay, so we've looked a bit at creations. I think we've seen some evidence that what men and women create may be different. Now, this is the $64,000 question. What about preferences? Is what happened to me that day at the exhibition quirky? Is it something peculiar about me, or is it something about the world? Well, I've done a number of studies, you could imagine, to try and find the answer to that. And I'll just show you a couple of studies today. One Christmas, I decided to select 2 Christmas cards. And the one on the left, male designed, the one on the right, female designed. You can probably see some of the elements now that are typical of those genders. The one on the right is quite overlapping, less organised, isn't it? Overlapping boundaries, very 2-dimensional. The one on the left is much more 3-dimensional, lots of male figures, very clear. And I asked people which one they preferred. And I started in the UK, and then I did it in 5 countries, with that image and several others as well, from the IKEA catalogue as well. So these are the results from the UK, just to give you a snapshot of the kind of responses that you get. So you can see, I think, that the males vastly prefer the male-produced cards, and the females vastly prefer the female-produced cards. So each gender has a very, very strong tendency to prefer the designs created by their own gender. And as I say, I've repeated this recently across 5 countries, Germany, China, Hungary, France, UK, and got the same results for this and other designs. Here's some websites I'll show you that I used in a similar experiment. I did quite a lot of work comparing websites created by men and women. These are websites created by students at Oxford University. And they don't teach design at Oxford, so it's a good place to look. The one on the left was male designed. The one on the right, which I'm about to show you, is female designed. And the same, again, in the preference test. The men massively preferred the first, and the women this one. The men can't stand designs looking like this. They think it's too ghastly. Anyway, so moving on swiftly. What's this all about? What could the factors be underlying all of this? Well, if you dip into the psychology literature, you actually find that how men and women see is not the same. Men are field independent. They see things independently of their context. Women are field dependent. They see things more in context. They like everything to match. Men have better spatial rotation than women. They have better targeting accuracy than women. When it comes to colour, no man has more than 3 colour pigments. Some women have 4 colour pigments. A much higher proportion of men than women are colourblind. Now, let's just focus on this colour thing for a minute. When you have a 4th colour pigment, it's not a minor thing. When you go from 3 to 4 colour pigments, can you see? You go from seeing several million colours to seeing hundreds of millions of colours. So there's a proportion of women out there, American researchers have estimated it at 50%, who can see hundreds of millions more colours than men can. Why these differences? Well, I'm very much of the view that these differences in visual spatial abilities, and incidentally men's eyes are spaced 5 millimetres further apart on average than women's, have evolved over the 99% of human history where we were hunters and gatherers, men and women. And if you think about it, to be a hunter, you need fantastic 3D vision. You don't need good colour vision because you're looking at a distance where everything looks dark. You don't need detail because at a distance you don't see detail. And actually to be colourblind gives you a tremendous advantage because you can see through camouflage. But if you're gathering berries, as women were, if you're looking after infants whose mood changes can be viewed through their cheek colours, and if you're looking after the whole social community, as women were, they were the managers of the day, building and looking after the community, you need to be able to read facial expression very well. You need very good colour vision. So we can talk about, I think, hunter and gatherer vision. Most of the purchasers are gatherers. Most of the people currently producing products for those gatherers are hunters. Does this matter? I'm just going to finish by looking at a couple of companies' websites, and we'll decide how good a job you think they're doing. So we're going to start with the automotive business here. We saw that slightly, in excess of 60% of new cars are bought by women. They have a big influence on the purchasing spend. How good is that website, do you think, at serving a male and a female market? Well, I'm going to very quickly take you into Alexa figures, and you've probably seen these before. They show you who's visiting websites. And if you look down here, male, female, it shows you graphically. If you see to the right of the central line, it shows the predominant gender looking at the website. So over here, we've got more males than females looking at this website. I'll just show you over here, because it's quite important. You see more males, that line is longer than, and then other lines going to the left. So this particular website is being visited more by men than women. Is that working for the target demographic? Is that doing as good a job as it could? Probably not. No, it could be doing a better job. Let's look at the second website. Oh, sorry. Wanted to show you something. Yeah. Cars. We're talking about cars. I've only found one car in commercial production produced by a female. And it's the one top left, bottom left. Produced by German designer Julian Blasi. It's a BMW that sold amazingly well. And I'm contrasting her model with the cars on the right, which were later BMW models. It's more compact. I don't know how you like it, the one on the left, bottom left, women in the group. But anyway, my last website is from the healthcare sector, a company called Boots. That's their website. In terms of the demographic that it's targeting, and I always think, like Marion, that the demographic, the inside-outside perspective, means that the first thing we have to do is look at the demographic and evaluate the design in relation to the demographic. So here's the demographic as we saw earlier. Women buy 93% of over-the-counter pharmaceuticals and healthcare products. How good a job was that website doing in attracting, do you think, that particular demographic? Before I show you the Alexa figures, is it attracting women to that website?
No.
Not quite sure. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the Alexa figures. This time, more women are looking at the website here, and fewer men. So it's doing a much better job at attracting the target demographic than the Ford website. And we could go back and have a very quick look. Excuse me. And you can see the shapes are quite interesting, the colours are quite interesting. It could probably do a better job, but it's certainly doing better than the car. So, summing up, what can we do at a corporate level that takes into account this new science of perception? Well, like Marion, I would say the starting point has to be the inside-outside perspective and considering who the target demographic is. And you might think that's an obvious thing to do, but I've done work for so many companies that the first question I ask is, who are you targeting? And there's very often silence at the end of the phone. A very, very big pharmaceutical company, I asked that question of, didn't know. I gave them the demographics. A very big American car manufacturer, they didn't know. I would say the companies that do know are likely to be doing a lot better, because at least they're at the beginning of this journey. So once you know your target demographic, you can then audit and look critically at the designs that you're producing. I do that through interactive workshops. And I did that, for example, with a company called Bounty, who produce a bag of goodies for every new mother in the UK. And so you can imagine their website is targeted largely at women. And when we did the workshop, we looked at their website, it was very, very masculine. It was very boxy, it was very blue. It really wasn't well adapted. So even though it was an all-male web design team, we discussed how they could change it in simple ways. And they made the changes very effectively and with great success, as we'll see when I work through this slide. So, having done the audit, the next thing is to decide what you need to do to change the design. Essentially, I think you need to shape design around these hunter and gatherer preferences that we've talked about. And now there is a lot of information, and it removes all the guesswork in terms of shapes, colours, and themes. And I'm even starting some work on colour combinations, because I think men and women actually like different combinations of colours. And here's the tricky bit. Then configuring the organisation so that it can deliver an inside-outside perspective. That is not easy with the male-dominant organisations that we currently have. And we're into the change management bit there. There's a major change demanded of organisations in order to make sure that success criteria are adapted to the outside demographic. And last but not least, and this should be the most pleasurable stage, is sitting back, looking at the fruits of your labours, evaluating what you've done, and all being well, being able to measure increased impact and profitability. So going back to Bounty, they found that their hits to their website had gone up enormously. I mentioned Canon cameras. They found that switching from rectangular shaped cameras to round shaped gave them a new place in the market. The cars, I can't claim to have had success with the big American car company. I don't think they were quite ready for this step. Their web design team was very male and very gung-ho, and I don't think culturally they were quite in the right place at that moment to move forward. But move forward and profitability will be there for the taking. I've written a couple of books describing these points in more detail. And I'd like to leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much.